Okay.
Today, I'm joined by Andy Barney. Andy Barney is the owner of the Kansas City Legends. And I've been getting a lot of questions about the 1v1 tournaments that I've been doing with my sessions. So I thought I'd just go straight to the source today. I actually played for Andy for a couple of years. And what's really great is that Tom, who used to host the show, was also one of his coaches. So Andy, whether he knows it or not, has a really big influence on the podcast and, more important, on the way that I coach. So welcome to the show again, Andy.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be, obviously, chatting with you, live. Although we've talked many times over the interceding years since you moved back to Canada, it's great to actually be live on air with you.
Yeah, and what I'm really excited about is what I love about what you do, and the reason. When a little backstory is I actually moved to Kansas for a couple of years, and I ended up playing when I first got there for, I don't remember their name, but it was the Stars. I don't know if that means anything to you, but
Sure.
we actually played Andy's team in one of our games, and my dad saw his unique way of coaching. And at the end of the game, he went up to Andy and was like, I need my son to be part of this club. And that's how we found you, by playing against your team and seeing this really unique style of coaching that my dad knew would help me. So can you talk a little bit about what you guys do at Kansas City, how it came about, and what was that kind of moment where you realized this is the direction that I need to take my club?
Well, I think like most coaches, when I first got into coaching, and I was age 16, and it was in Oxford, England, where I grew up. And, the president of the club, as I was just walking down the street in the neighborhood, and I'd just been signed by Oxford, and I was playing for money for the first time in my life, and I was getting my name and picture in the paper and things of that nature. And Frank Yateman stopped me in the street and he said, we need somebody to coach our under-8s. Would you be interested? And I ummed and ahed, and he said, listen, you've got a responsibility to give back to the game. These kids need you, and you're right now, you're locally famous, and they're going to look up to you. And and I agreed to step on board and coach for Quarry Rovers boys in Headington, Oxford. And it was a revelation, because I realized very soon that at age 16 I didn't have the maturity and I wasn't qualified. But I tried to muscle through, and I had some interesting learning experiences. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share one of them with you. One day I was coaching this little lad and the rest of his team, and the ball went out of play, and I said to him, "Hey, Brian, go fetch the ball." And and he looked at me and he said, "F off, Mr. Barney." And, there was a combination of complete insult and respect in the statement. And I looked at him, and a vision of his dad, who was a brawler in the working class area of Oxford, popped into my mind. And this guy wasn't a guy to be messed with. And I looked at Brian and I said, that's okay, Brian, I'll fetch it. I could see his dad coming up to me after practice and sorting me out. So it was a baptism of fire. And but after muscling through for a number of years, obviously you learn on the job, and there's no better way than to be embarrassed and to be frustrated, and have to go home and read about things and dwell on things and study things and come up with a better way of handling the situation. So that was kind of where I got started. But the big epiphany was, after coaching voluntarily for a decade, I moved to the States. I had a job with an indoor soccer facility in Long Island that involved a lot of coaching kids. Moved to Kansas City with some people from the same company. Very quickly was made director of coaching for the state of Kansas. Something that would take many decades these days happened to me early, because the game was so young over here. And just as it happened, not long after I was made director of coaching for the state of Kansas, the Midwest Regional Director of Coaching resigned, and the president of the Kansas State Youth Soccer Association was on the board of the Midwest Soccer Association. That's the 13, I think, Midwestern state associations there were at the time. And they needed a director of coaching. And he said, would you do it if I offered you the job? And I said, I'd jump at the chance. So in that role and responsibility, I took the under 19 regional team to the national camp that was set up to select the under 19 national team. So I had the Midwest regional team, and I had the chance to meet and work with Anson Dorrance. And many of you will not need an introduction to Anson, because he won the first World Cup for the US in 1991. He has, and still is, been the coach of University of North Carolina since before that time when we worked together. And, you know, Anson is widely regarded as the most knowledgeable women's coach in the world. And I certainly regard him that way. And he's remained a strong friend to this day, and is an amazingly knowledgeable human being. And Anson, at the end of the national camp, asked the 4 regional coaches, his under 19 national coach, Hank Lung, who was coaching at George Mason out of Virginia at the time, he asked us to pick the national team. And here's where it gets really interesting. So stay with me on this one, because we picked about 10 players instantly for the 18-player squad and the 6 alternates. We were asked to pick a total of 24, and it was easy to come up with the first 10 players. And, you know, we thought everything was going great, and then we bogged down, and people started throwing out names, and we had about 40 names on the table, and we couldn't, for the life of us, pick the next 8 players for the squad and the 6 alternates. And so after going round and round for another 15, 20 minutes about, you know, a number of the players that we were looking at to round out the roster, Anson, who'd been off to the side, watching us with his typical wry smile on his face, he said, do you mind me interjecting here and showing you, you know, what you've done? And I thought that was kind of a weird way of putting it, showing you what you've done, because, you know, it's obvious what we've done. We'd picked 10 players. And he said, look at the 10 players that you've selected. What can they all do? And, you know, I looked at the names of the players that I'd selected and the other people had selected, and it hit me like a rock. We had selected all of the, and you know, let's pause for a moment here. You know, what does the audience here think, you know, the type of player we'd selected could do? You know, what would you select if you were, you know, picking the best players? You know, and that's a serious question. Who would you select if you were picking a national team? Who would you first select to be on that national team?
Well, for me, I mean, just looking back at that iconic team, and I grew up in Chicago, and Mia Hamm was just one of my favorite players growing up. But before I knew anything about that, I mean, I would probably look at the defense. Like for me, I want going into a World Cup and Olympics, I want a really strong defense. So that for me would be something that I would look at first, I think, or a creative midfielder. I think that's where a lot of coaches would go, I think, to that, like that creative midfielder of, can they find those options?
Well, we were never primed going into this to pick a certain type of player. So, you know, we all, I think, did this off of the cuff, all of the coaches concerned. And, you know, every single coach that was on this selection committee, you know, was highly qualified, very experienced. I was probably the least experienced of all the coaches at that point in time. And we picked all the players that could do, you know, either both or one of 2 things. Any ideas?
Well, I know, because I've heard this story 100 times from you and from Anson's door, from his podcast. But I mean, we all know, I think, especially the US, how iconic that team was and those players and what they brought to that table. So for me, I know the answer, and that is those players, the 1v1 masters, the ones that battle, and that, I mean, that Anson knew, anyone that they would go against, they would not be scared of, that they would always be on the front foot. And I do want to say that Anson Dorn's podcast, Vision of a Champion, is one of the podcasts that every single coach should go back, listen to every single episode, because not only does he tell this amazing story that you tell, but every single episode, he has a different iconic women's national team player on the show. So he's had Mia Hamm. He's had some of his former players, former national team players. So I'm going to let you keep going with the story before I keep talking too much, but it's definitely those 1v1 masters, those players that battle. And I know those are the ones that you guys, without even knowing it, ended up picking.
Yeah. And Anson said, literally, look at the players you've already selected. What do those players do? Who are they? What's their basic approach to the game? And I looked at the list of players that we'd picked, and it was, there's a great English word that I think is incredibly descriptive in this instance. And the word is gobsmacked. And, and I'm going to give you a visual on this one, because it literally means this. And I looked at that list and I was gobsmacked, because I'd never trained this type of player.
Because it's a podcast, it's a shocked face. It's a open jaw, eyes out, like what is happening type face that Andy made. So sorry, keep going.
Yeah. It's a complete shock. Amazing. What I felt at that moment. And we had picked all the great dribblers and goal scorers, either the players that could do both or could do one or the other, and, of course, the players that can do both are the most iconic players of all time, in terms of the professional game. We think of, Pelé, we think of, going back even further, Puskas or Stanley Matthews, and Garincha. And they're moving into the 1970s. We think of Johan Cruyff and the icon of the 1980s, Diego Maradona. And then moving more into the 90s. We've got the original Ronaldo, or the
and my favorite player.
Yeah. And then of course the amazing Zinedine Zidane. And then we move into the current era. When these players were kids. Cristiano Ronaldo,
at
Leo
Manchester
Messi.
United, yeah.
And and if you go back and look at YouTube, when Leo Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo were 17, 18, 19 years of age, they were dribbling fools. They would take anybody on using all sorts of tricks and skills, and without being a coach that coached those type of players. In my first ever opportunity to help select a national team, I had picked, just as all the other guys in the room had picked, I had picked all the players on that camp that were outstanding at taking people on, beating defenders, and scoring great goals. And here's the really embarrassing thing, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it to this day. I never trained any of my players up until that point to be a deceptive dribbler and goal scorer, to be that type of player. So here I am experiencing an eye-opening revelation, but also realizing that I'm soccer coaching equivalent of a criminal to my players, because I just selected 10 players, the like of which I'd never tried to coach. So all those players I'd coached up until that point, I completely let down, because I hadn't tried to teach them to do the things that would guarantee they would get to the highest level of play, a national team level of play. And if you can imagine, that was a kind of a horrible feeling to experience, because there's nothing worse than realizing that you've wasted 10 years of coaching and your coaching career development, and you've along the way failed every player that's played for you up until that point. I don't know if you can even imagine it, but
Yeah,
was.
I honestly think that that's something that every coach can relate to. There has to be, in my opinion, at least for me, every single year, and just with the ability of technology, and we have YouTube now, we have just access to everything. It feels like every single year I have a new epiphany, and I go, oh, I wish I knew this 5, 10 years earlier when I started my coaching, because I've had so many players come up and I just missed this specific, uh, just theory that I now is ingrained in me. And I was lucky to have found you as early as I did, because when I started my coaching journey, which I'm excited to talk about, the 1v1 tournaments, which I've also talked about earlier, it was something that I just did. It was like, okay, today we're going to the session. I know that at least half the session is going to be that. I can plan for the rest of it. So that rest of it was, I found over the years, there are times where I go, oh, I just found something new that I wish I knew 10, 15 years earlier. But I really think it's the experience. It's the ability to build on just a concept after concept, and then something just clicks for you as a coach when you see it. And it's so great to hear that story of just an environment that you were a part of. It wasn't, a class. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, you saw the environment and you go, this is it. Like, this is the environment I need to create. So I love how we kind of found that environment. But now what I really want to get into is, I'm a parent, and I'm a young parent, not actually, but a young parent comes to you. They say, I have a 5-year-old kid. I don't know anything about soccer. How can you help him or her become this national team player, which you've created so many national team professional players? What is it that you do at the very youngest ages to introduce these players to the game and get them to that epiphany moment that you had?
Before we address that, you just said something that is kind of interesting here. You said you were lucky to have found me as a coach way back when, and you obviously forgotten that in the middle of those one-on-ones, you didn't feel very lucky at the time.
Of course not. Of course.
when your tongue was dragging and the sweat was dripping off you, and and you knew you had another 6 rounds still to go. 4 minutes going at each other, one-on-one. So you're facing down another 24 minutes of this. This absolute nightmare with a soccer ball at your feet, or the opponent going at you with a ball at their feet. Lucky is an interesting way of describing it, because it's pain, isn't it?
It's so much pain. But what I learned, and I think you guys talked about this in your podcast, but it's accountability that you're teaching these players. Because I remember in my sessions, I'd go, I'd be in school and I'd be like, oh, I have soccer today. And then I'd go to my session and, we'd play 5v5, 4v4. And I'd be like, okay, I don't really need to do anything. I've got Johnny, who is one of my friends growing up. He's fantastic. He'll just do the work today and then I'll do it next time. But with your sessions, you don't have that. When you go into a 1v1 tournament, it's you against someone else. The responsibility falls just on you. And no matter how you're feeling that session, it forces you to tap into something that in other areas you can't. In other sessions, situations, warm-ups, environments, you're just not forced to take responsibility. And listening to Anson on his podcast, that's something that I took so much from these one-on-one environments, that if my players are on the field, and you can watch me coach on YouTube, which a lot of the listeners follow, I upload all my games. I don't talk that much, because the players have responsibility. It's the player's responsibility to play. It's not your responsibility. And how do you teach that? Through this environment. So again, I think maybe I didn't feel lucky at the time, but it's funny. You can always reflect and see the upsides and really what I got out of it, which is a really new, for I think Canada, or my area, a really new way of teaching players this 1v1.
Yeah, it's interesting, something you just said, I'm obviously a contrarian because of the way that I coach, and something that you just said is something that, honestly, I completely disagree with. And, you just mentioned that you don't talk that much. And, you might recall that I talk every second of every minute of practices and games, and, I'm one of these individuals that believes that, if I'm on my game as a coach, there are coachable moments left, right, and center all over the field. And, let's say I've got, 16 players on my team that day running in and out of the game. I can talk all game long to my players, and I'm only reaching each of them 1/16 of the time.
Yeah.
And so, I know I'm irritating. Other coaches hate to coach against me because, I'm always shouting and not negatively, just making points and encouraging, and, asking my players to see things a different way, and a lot of the time I'm just cheerleading, I'm praising bravery, courage on the field, because
100%.
we're trying to develop brave, creative leaders, and it's frightening when you got the ball at your feet and some big ugly gorilla on the other team is trying to hack and whack you, and and you're being asked to do marathon turns and cross turns and the most amazing artistic things, but this isn't just the purity of you and the paintbrush and the canvas. This is ugly. This is sweat. This is blood. You're getting kicked. You're getting pushed.
Yep.
A lot of times you're getting trash talked. You're getting cussed at.
Yep.
And under those type of pressures, you've got to produce the brush strokes of a Vincent van Gogh, a Rembrandt, a Picasso, and it's a heck of a challenge for these kids under these type of pressures, to focus and go for it and be brave and make a big play. And so a lot of the time, and it gets very repetitive. And I know it's got to be super irritating to the other coaches and the parents on the other team, but a lot of the time during a game, I would just stand on the sidelines and shout skill at the top of my lungs to every player when they receive the ball or as they're about to receive the ball, so that they get into the mode of doing more when they get the ball, instead of just dumping it, giving it away, and chickening out of taking the responsibility to make a big play, to do something beautiful, to do something exciting, and to do something that pushes the edge of their developmental envelope, if you like.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about coaching points during the game that you have a little bit later on. But now let's go back and talk about the training session, because that's where I think you do things very differently than everyone else. So let's start at the youngest ages, that kid that has never played soccer before, and then we'll kind of move through the, I guess, different stages of, I guess, soccer that you guys have. So what do you guys do at 5 years old? What does the session look like? How does that really work?
And so this is the meat and potatoes, so this is the the stuff that fills your belly in a soccer program, is going through one by one the things that are important in a practice. And so let's go to to the parenting side of things. The parents got the kid in the car, and or was trying to get the kid in the car. They're at home, and and a lot of kids drag their heels. And so what can I do as a coach to alleviate the parent of that problem? What do you think? What do you think should be the first emphasis when I start my practice, to help the parents get the kid in the car, to help the parents have an excited kid that wants to be at practice? Do I start my practices with one-on-one, which is a battle, which is a war, which is tough, which a lot of kids don't look forward to, even though they're dribbling and shooting a lot, which kids love? Or do I start my practice with a fun game? What do you think?
Well, for me, it's all about fun. So
Right.
I think it just depends on the level of fun and what you can do. But for me, there are different ways to create fun in both the 1v1 atmosphere that we'll talk about and in the warm-up game, right? So I really
Right.
want to, how would you create the fun warm-up environment for you guys?
Well, understanding that, we need to, have the kids excited to be at practice. We need kids to be bugging their parents to get them to the practice on time. And what I do with my kids is I start them off with, if it depends whether I'm working on dribbling or shooting that day, but those are the two skills that I work on almost exclusively when I'm dealing with a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. And I want the kids to really, really be excited and run into. We do everything indoors, in our facilities these days, which is, a topic for a whole different podcast. But I want them to run into the facility, run to, any one of the 14 practice fields that we have, excited to be, there, and run onto the field and immediately engage in, the most enjoyable game that we can give them. And if I'm going to be working on dribbling that day, it's probably foxes and rabbits. And I'm the big, mean, nasty fox. And and I'll start when I've only got 2 kids there. The first 2 kids, they get a ball each, and they've got to dribble from one penalty area. These are only small fields, remember, one penalty area to the penalty area at the other end, without me hitting their ball with my ball. I'm the big, mean, nasty fox. And so I'm chasing them with my ball, and I've got to hit their ball while they're trying to dribble away from me and get into the penalty area at the other end. And I give them a brief respite, and then they've got to go again. And when I hit their ball, they join me in the middle as one of the big, mean, nasty foxes going after the rest of the rabbits. And as the kids arrive, the 3rd player, the 4th player, the 5th player, the 6th player, they join in with the game. And we'll play a number of rounds of foxes and rabbits, and I will throw in during the, if I'm going after a player and they can do a move as I'm chasing them, they get a free pass. So if they try and do a Maradona turn, and these are things that even at 5 and 6 we've already taught them or attempted to teach them. So if they attempt a Maradona turn, if they attempt a Cruyff turn, whilst I'm chasing them, I'll give them a free pass and I'll go after a different rabbit, and so we throw in, even in the fun game, we throw in, do a move, do something that we've worked on, and you can be more successful at the fun game, and so, here we are now, we're 10 minutes into practice and we played foxes and rabbits for 10 minutes. And now we have, as near as we're probably going to get, the whole squad is there. And what you'll find is, if you do foxes and rabbits, or another game we love to do if we're going to be doing shooting for that practice is Wembley, to get all the kids there. And Wembley is where you score 3 goals, you go in goal. And so, the goalkeeper serves the ball out to the far end of the small boarded practice fields that we use. And then, everybody tries to score against that one goalie. It's go in one way. There's one good keeper in goal. And as soon as somebody scores 3 goals, they go in goal. So after a while, you might have 6 of your players that have all got 2 goals, and they're all fighting to score that all-important 3rd goal. And a lot of times I'll throw out, 2 and 3 balls at the same time, so that, the kids are getting a lot of chances to go to goal and shoot. And, but both of these games are just wonderful, fun games that the kids really look forward to, so, typically when you do that practice after practice, the kids are the ones chasing the parents to get them to practice, and instead of the parents, having to, rush the kids and get on the kids and last minute search for their soccer shoes. And the kids are waiting for their parents to, and hustling their parents to get into the car, because they know if they're 10 minutes late, they're going to miss most of the foxes and rabbits. They're going to miss most of the Wembley.
So I love that. Let me ask you about the foxes and rabbits game. When does it ever happen that a child will kick the ball and it'll hit another child hard? Because at that age, they toe punt and all that kind of stuff. Or Do you know what I mean? So if they're kind of moving around and someone's kicking the balls at them, do players ever get hurt in that situation? Or do I just not understand?
Yeah, it tends not to happen because you're trying to hit the player's ball while they're dribbling, and if the ball does hit the player instead of the ball, it hits them, at the waist level or below. So, it's very rare in foxes and rabbits that, a player will blast the ball, at another player's head. You have to finagle it. You have to finesse it more than you have to blast it. So honestly, I can't remember the last time I saw that happen, where a player got tagged in the face. That's more often going to happen in a shooting situation. And so that would be more likely to happen in a game of Wembley, but it doesn't even happen that often in a game of Wembley.
Well, what I love about Wembley and what you said is I personally, I mean, we're in Canada, so for us it's hockey. Hockey's huge here, but in the States, basketball is big. And when we look at kids and what they do in the playground, it's 1v1. They just, whoever's there, hey, want to play 1 against 1, and then it grows and grows, and you can have lots of 1v1 battles. So it's a very type of, again, 1v1 kind of basketball type environment that half court, they don't play full court in that kind of warm-up game, but that's how the US basketball program is the best in the world. And just even their college program, I mean, those players could play anywhere and still be, in different leagues around the world and still be the best in the world. So there's lots of parallels I see in that Wembley game to that amazing NBA, quality player that, that is, the US basketball program.
Yeah, I fully agree. Magic Johnson grew up on the courts of Lansing, Michigan, playing, in the D, basically, a winner stay on, 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3 basketball, and that's how he built his amazing skills. Michael Jordan, it's kind of interesting, he had 2 athletic older brothers, and of course, they played a ton of 1-on-1, 1-on-2 basketball under the basket. And when he went to the basket, his brothers would slap him down. And if you watch The Last Dance, the whole series of episodes where it goes into Michael Jordan's history, his background, it talks about his family, and and it talks about how competitive that they were, and him being the runt of the litter, if you like, the little guy. He had to be tougher than his 2 older brothers because, if he tried to go to the basket and do a basic layup, they'd take him out, So he had to fake to go to the basket, to do a layup, and he had to fade away and do a jumper. And that became his iconic shot. But also when he went to the basket, if you look at some of the footage back there and you look at, Bill Laimbeer of the Detroit Pistons, when Michael Jordan went to the basket, they show him to his weak hand, and they cover that in the episodes, and try and make him predictable and try and send him to his weakness. But, they admit that they went to just foul him and take him out and hurt him. The game was brutal back in those days, just like soccer was back in those days, and so, there may never be another player like Michael Jordan because the game isn't as tough anymore. Referees call a tighter game. There may never be another player like Diego Maradona because the game isn't as tough anymore. Referees call it tighter. So, the players today don't have to deal with the violence that they had to suffer, 2 and 3 decades ago.
100%.
So, yeah. So, but we kind of got off track a little bit, getting back to the sequence of what we do in practice, we've got the kids excited. The first 10 minutes, it's fun. They're dying to get there. They have fun when they're there for the first 10 minutes. Now they're really up. They're really engaged. They're really psychologically ready to learn. And that's when I go into technique, and the first stage of technique is static. It's this is a Maradona turn. This is a Cruyff turn. And if you don't think you can teach this to a 5-year-old, you haven't tried, because you can. You just break it down into sections, and you get down on your hands and knees and actually move their limbs through the first part of a Maradona turn, the first part of a Cruyff turn, whatever move you're teaching. And, you can, by getting them to actually feel the move, which don't ask them to watch you and copy you. Number one, most coaches make the horrendous mistake of facing their players when they're teaching their players to do a move. And you're asking a kid to mirror, to turn around the image that they're seeing, and then somehow it's not copying it, because kids can't copy you if you're facing them, because what they're seeing, doesn't work in terms of copying. So you have to turn around and face away from a young child when you're teaching them how to do a move, so they can actually do the monkey see, monkey do thing, which is what kids do. They copy, they emulate, and they need to see, in their mind's eye, what it is that they're going to be doing. So, I turn my back on my players when I'm teaching them to do moves, so they can just copy it. They don't have to mirror image, turn it around, because psychologically it's much more difficult for them to do that. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny you say that. I didn't even realize that I was doing it, but that's the way I don't face my players. I always face away from them. And I guess subconsciously it was probably being a part of your sessions that allowed me to do that. So now we've gotten, fun, we're into it, technique, we're into it. What's the next step?
Just a brief aside, I just got to thinking as well that, this has another huge advantage to the players that I coach, because, even in my heyday, my backside was way better looking than my front side. So if I'm facing away from my players, it's a double benefit. What was that question you said again? I'm sorry.
So we did the fun part. We did technique. What comes next?
What happens then is you drill the technique. If they're 5 and 6, their technique is going to be relatively poor. And so you grill and drill the technique as intensely as you can get away with a 5 or 6 year old, and you might be able to do some dynamic technique, because there's stages of technique, isn't there? You work through the static technique stage, and then, as soon as it's viable, you move into dynamic technique. But it may not even be viable at age 5 and 6, probably won't be, to move into dynamic technique before their motivation starts to ebb away. You remember 5 and 6 year olds have an attention span which is fairly minute. So you're going to be lucky to get 10 minutes of intense work on a move, or anything that approaches intense work on a move. And if you're dealing with, I wouldn't suggest dealing with any more than 8 to 10 kids at that age level, because you'll have 2 kids that have lost complete focus in the back of your group, start to play some type of tag in the background while you're trying to coach another kid. So what you've got to do is you've got to persevere for that, that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes, that 11 minutes, that 12 minutes, whilst you're getting a really recognizable benefit. And practices for 5 and 6 year olds are probably going to be no more than an hour. Yeah. So you've got these kids for an hour. You've already, spent, 10, 12 minutes on Wembley or Foxes and Rabbits. Now you've got 10 minutes in to working them on the techniques of one of the moves or part of one of the moves. And, now they're starting to get bored, because this is fairly static. There's nothing exciting. There's no fun and games. There's, no rabbit, show me your rabbit ears, rabbit, show me your rabbit teeth. There's none of the fun cheering stuff, rabbits, show me your cute little rabbit's tails where they turn around and waggle their bums. There's none of that stuff that goes on, while you're working on the moves, and so, and a lot of coaches miss this, as the motivation is flagging, so the learning flags, it ebbs away. And what we have to do at this moment in time is we have to get them back up again. We have to give them fun. So in the middle of my practices with 5 and 6 year olds, we play another fun game. And there's thousands of fun games that you can play. And of course, I always pick one with a ball. So there's no point in going over the fun games that you can play, because, they're out there all over the internet. You can look up fun games for soccer, and let's not waste this podcast on describing fun games. But, in the middle of the practice, instead of having this massive trough in motivation, so, in your mind's eye, if you draw a trough, a big U, then, in the middle of practice, you can have the kids at the bottom of the U, or, by playing a fun game in the middle of the practice, you can create 2 mini troughs. There's going to be some ebbing away of fun and motivation while you're working on technique. That's inevitable with a 5 and 6 year old, because their attention span is that of a gnat at that age. So what we do is we turn this big trough, this big, downward slide into the bottom of the trough, into 2 mini troughs, where we give them a fun game to start. We work on their technique, in the next 10 minutes, and then we give them a fun game in the middle, so that, they're motivated again. And then we work on the next stage of their technique. So, for example, let's say we've worked on static technique in the first really important coaching stage of this practice. Then we give them a fun game in the middle. In the second really important coaching stage of practice with 5 and 6 year olds, you've now got them moving and doing whatever it is you're teaching them, a Cruyff turn, let's say. So now, they've come out of this motivational fun game in the middle of practice. They're up, they're ready. You calm them down a little bit, but they're attentive, and they're enjoying it. They've got a smile on their face. And now we work them on doing the Cruyff turn while we're moving. Dribbling with the ball and then trying to do a Cruyff turn while they're moving, which in the early days is maybe all you can do, with a Cruyff turn. Now, after you've been working on Cruyff turn for a couple of months, and I strongly suggest you don't jump around between moves, because all the scientific research shows that block practice, where you work on one thing for an extended period of time, is much more effective than going from move to move to move to move, practice after practice after practice, because the kids don't get the time and the attention to one move to groove it into their neuromuscular system. And so we work on one move for an extended period of time, let's say 2 months, and we gradually improve, going through different stages of difficulty, improve their technique over that 2-month period, until the move that they can do at the end of the 2 months is somewhat close to technically perfect for that stage, whether that's the static stage or the initial low-level dynamic stage. We want them to be doing the move the right way, because if they're doing the move the wrong way, they're actually grooving a bad habit.
Yeah.
And, the old saying is, if you don't have time to do it perfectly in the first place, when are you going to have time later on to fix it? So we have to get them doing these moves perfectly. So my practice might be a fun game when they get there, 10 minutes, 12 minutes of working on the static technique, a fun game in the middle, and 10 to 12 minutes of working on dynamic technique. And then I'll ask you this question: what do we finish with?
Well, most people will finish with a game, like a match.
And they're
but at that
absolutely
age,
right. They're absolutely right. But why do we finish with a scrimmage, as everybody calls it in the USA? Why is that the thing that we always finish with?
Well, because it's fun. That's what the kids are coming out for.
Bingo.
I would say.
Bingo.
But
and what do we want the kids to leave with?
A great memory and wanting to come back for more.
Fantastic answer. And so we are priming them for the next practice if the last thing we give them is fun.
So let me ask you there, because we're talking about 5 and 6 year olds. Let's say you have, 12 players at the session. To divide a 5 and 6 year old who is brand new to soccer and just play, 5v5 or 6v6, is that something that you guys do at that age, or do you even break it down into, even less than that? and still give them that match atmosphere, but not really the 5-5, 6v6 at that age.
But what I'll do is I'll throw three, and bear in mind that we've created an environment that is absolutely, I think, as near perfect as you can ever create for these type of training sessions. We've got small, if you think of an outdoor field, the length of these fields, age related, because we've got 3 different lengths of fields, are restraining arc to goal line. So even if you're outdoors coaching this, try and visualize, the restraining arc to goal line distance, and put your cones with your goals, maybe outdoors, put your cones that distance apart, and I'll often throw out 3 balls in this environment. Now, we're boarded, so we're boarded to 8 foot high. And so if a kid shoots, it comes back off the board into the field of play. But, I'll run around trying to keep 3 balls live outdoors if I'm running an outdoor practice session. So the kids are always playing 2 teams, one against each other, but they've got 3 balls to choose from. So that, if you've got, let's say 10 kids at practice, 1/3 of the time they're on a ball, or close to 1/3 of the time that they're on a ball in that final scrimmage.
And I think, if I'm being honest, I think the environment that you guys have allows for you to do these things that in my area, for example, I can't do. And what I'm specifically talking about is the foxes and rabbits game. What's great about your area is the boards, because if I think of, my young kids kicking that ball, then they have to go chase it, bring it back, and who knows how far they're going to kick it. So that's one of the advantages that I think players in your club and in your environment have, that unique way that you structure the environment to support your ideas and to support your overall goal of the session. So I think that's really great and unique to you guys. Now, the rest of that session, obviously, that's something that we can do in our sessions, or something that I do in my sessions. But, you've mentioned Wembley as a fantastic warm-up game that I think obviously works in every session. So I think that's an important point that, we should make clear for some of the listeners.
Addressing that point though, even if I do this outdoors, I pull my goals, and I try and, and I always, one way or another, I actually had goals made for me, early in my full-time professional coaching career. And, on my practice fields, I pulled those goals, into that distance apart. So it was age related to, the age that I was coaching, and going goal to goal, all the area even behind the goal was live. So if you shoot and miss, so let's say we're playing foxes and rabbits and there's all these balls going, and, and so we're trying to kick somebody else's ball with our ball. Well, obviously you're going to miss. Most of the time you're going to miss, and so, the ball is still live though. And I would, hopefully have, all the balls that, I ask every kid to bring a ball, and I also bring my own bag of balls. So I throw all the balls out there. So there's loads of balls out there so that it's maximum time on the ball. Now, it's not as perfect as our environment with the boards, but, what we're looking for is repetition. 100%. Repetition in dribbling, repetition in ball striking. So the more you can do to bring more balls, to have the goals closer together, so that, the balls stay on a limited area, so that we're not chasing the balls, 40, 50, 60 yards. And while we're on that topic, here in Kansas City, we've got an amazing number of fantastic just turfed fields, beautiful fields, perfect surfaces. And they're an absolute nightmare to practice a team on, because when a kid, kicks a ball or shoots a ball, the ball doesn't stop, and heaven forbid there's a breeze behind it, because it will run 70, 80 yards. And my practice turns into an exercise in running after a ball to bring it back, to do something, viable with it. And most of the time is spent just running after a ball, on these big fields. And these fields are lovely for games. But they are a facepalm for development, an absolute facepalm. And when they first opened them, I got all excited and I booked some space, and I took my under-14 girls team out there, and we played goal-to-goal one-on-ones. And inside a minute, I had nobody on my field, because the kids had taken shots, the shots had missed, some of them, and one shot had missed for every pair, wide of the goal in that first minute. And I looked around and, I think I had eight partners, pairs going one-on-one, and I had 8 kids stood doing nothing while 8 kids ran 30, 40, 50, 60 yards, sometimes around somebody else's practice to fetch their ball. And I immediately went and resigned my booking because, they were sold out. They could, reallocate my fields to another club, another team. And I went back to coaching on my outdoor grass where the ball didn't roll as far because, I just knew that we weren't coming close to getting the repetition that we needed to take our game to a whole different level on that beautiful, fast turf field. So, that's one of the reasons why we've pulled our practices all indoors, and boarded every single field, because we waste no time at all, whether it's a 4-on-4 game. It's like playing in the penalty area outdoors, and we just don't waste any time chasing balls. So we get maximum repetition. It's off of the charts what we can do. Of course, it's very expensive, to build out a leased indoor facility or to buy our own buildings. But that's what we're doing in Kansas City, because it's massively better for development, when we have a boarded, netted environment where every second of every minute is developmental.
And I think, with all the coaches listening, the one thing that I really want coaches to understand from you, because obviously, as I'm sure coaches just have different philosophies, different ideas. But what's great about what you did was you had a goal and you found the best way to manipulate the environment that you're in to get the type of players that you want. So while there are coaches out there that, as we get into the 1v1s in the game and we talk a little bit about more the ideology and all that, they may not agree with it. But what I want you to realize is the amazing ability that Andy was able to first see these players that we talked about earlier on the national team and create a profile for his ideal player, and then create the environment that supports that. So I think that's amazing. But now let's move on to the meat and bones, as you said before. We talked a little bit and we keep talking back about that 1v1 atmosphere. So tell me about that. Tell me what that looks like. Tell me some of the coaching points. And yeah.
So, and before we get too far on, this is, these areas that I've discovered that I was completely addressing in the wrong way. It's very important to understand that I've compartmentalized the game of soccer to 4 key areas. And, those key areas are, first and foremost, and these aren't in no particular order, but these are the orders that I've written about in my books. The first book that I brought out was Training Soccer Legends, and it's about coaching philosophy. And I don't think it's the most important thing these days, but I spent 25 years breaking down my coaching philosophy. And there's a lot of, important rationale behind the coaching philosophy. But, breaking down the coaching philosophy of, the dribbling, shooting emphasis, and then how to put that into the game scenario, which we're going to be getting to. And then I realized, after I'd finished and published that book, I realized that, and this was through Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg became, a friend to me in terms of opening my eyes to something that I hadn't really recognized to the degree that I should have, the importance of, and that was the players that had graduated the program, like yourself, and gone on to other environments, whatever those environments might be. And you chose to make your life and your business soccer like I did. But many of these players went on and, they went into real estate, they went into insurance, they went into all manner of incredible careers. I mean, I've got a reptile zookeeper on the island of Jamaica, and I can't even begin to tell you how many crazy things, One of my daughters is a vegan influencer that lives in Dahab, Egypt, and has traveled the world in a way that I will never travel the world. Another of my daughters owns Unicorn Hugs and Noble Cause Productions with her husband. And, they do Renaissance Festival shows involving white horses with the unicorns, who also do hospital visits and visit kids with cancer. And that's the Unicorn Hugs part of things. And Noble Cause is a jousting troupe. It's the biggest jousting troupe in the world. And they go to multiple Renaissance festivals every year. And Noble Cause is about teaching kids how to do the right thing. And in their productions, the good guys always win. And so, in my family, I've got another daughter that owns a tattoo studio and is an amazing tattoo artist. So, this isn't about my kids, having to play soccer all the way through their lives and choose soccer as a career. This is about them finding their passions. This is about making them brave enough and creative enough and leaders enough that in life they can spread their wings and do what they want to do and follow their passions and do incredible, amazing things. And so don't get me wrong, they all played soccer and they were all very good. But they've gone on to take that brave, creative leadership background and the lessons they learned out into society, which is the ultimate justification for what we do. We don't emphasize winning games. We emphasize making brave, creative plays, and moving beyond the focus on the statistic, that seems to dominate our society. How big is the house we live in? How much money do we make? Are we winning compared to other people? Into the moment by moment, are we taking advantage of every moment and doing the brave, creative thing and really learning how to be a better leader for life, and a kinder leader for life, but also a leader with the eye of the tiger, with an extreme level of competitiveness so that, we can be successful in the toughest environments. So, but getting back to your question, it's a very, very good question. What do we do during the sessions and how do we keep our stats? And, what's the value of tracking statistics, when we're teaching kids? And this is amazing. In fact, the value of keeping statistics is so all-encompassing and wonderful that I call my pencil my magic wand. And Segef, you can see me now. I've got a pencil in my hand. This is not a pencil. This is a magic wand, because the minute I get this out and I give a kid a 2-minute round of one-on-ones when they're 5 and 6 years old, the effort factor goes through the roof because they know I'm going to keep score. So for 2 minutes, they go at it, and they go at it with conditions. You must use the move that we've been working on. So if we've been working on a Cruyff turn, if we've been working on a scissors, if we've been working on a drag Maradona, which is unique to the Legends Club, never seen this in the pro game. It's part of our Maestro Series. If we've been working on these moves, then you have to do the moves every time you get the ball in the one-on-one. You must attempt a Maradona turn if that's what we've been working on during the practice session, every time you get the ball. And that is a given, because if you don't attempt the Maradona turn before you shoot, the goal doesn't count. So, there's no upside. So we lay out very, very succinctly before the start of our multi-round one-on-ones what we're going to be doing. And we don't do a lot of multi-round one-on-ones with 5 and 6 year olds. We're working more on the fun and the technique. But gradually, as the 6-year-old turns into a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old, we work them more and more into the one-on-ones so they get used to going to war. And I use that term purposefully. I want them to go to war without weapons. I want them to go to war without fouling, without being dirty, because you don't become a competitor unless you have to do things under extreme stress, and you have to fight through the barriers of skill, of, anaerobic fatigue, of aerobic fatigue, of, physical injury, because kids get elbowed, they're going to be kicked, they're going to be pushed, and, they can't just lay down and start crying. You've got to battle through the toughest stages of the one-on-one competition. But when I bring out my pencil, it gets real, because at the end of the round, the kids come to me and they give me a score. And the conditions mandate the score has to be done the right way. You must do a move before you can shoot. So you've got to be super skillful with your dribbling skills before you shoot, which is the other huge skill of the game. There's nothing like goal scoring. And when you come back to me and you give me your score, it's going to reflect, were you brave enough to take a player on doing a move? And were you brave enough to take a shot? Because as the old saying goes, you will miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You will not score if you don't take a shot. The only time you're going to score is when you take a shot. And there's a lot of kids that grow up in the wrong program, that grow up without coaches that emphasize the shot, who don't have the bravery to take a shot because they're not confident in their shot. They haven't had the level of technical training, but most importantly, the repetition to hit hundreds of thousands of shots over the course of their career. And when I say hundreds of thousands of shots, using my daughter Holly as an example, she's my fifth born daughter in terms of age.
And I think I saw her, you had a YouTube video of her doing, it looked like a fake shot and then drag back and then Maradona. Do you know what I mean? There's
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that, if you have not seen this this clip, and you can follow Andy on his social media, which I will have in the description. This changed my idea of Maradonas, because I grew up again with Andy doing the Maradonas. But when I saw her adding a fake shot, it completely changed my mind. Now, this is a move that I've introduced with my players. But if you're a coach listening to this fake shot Maradona is, and the way she does it, and there's probably, I think, like 30, 40 just clips of her doing it and beating the player every single time. And it's the same move over and over and over again. And it's this environment that creates it. What I want to talk about is a lot of coaches, when they think of 1v1, is, it's 1 against 1 and everyone else is in a line, and that player will go and then the next player will go. You do something very different in your environment, whereas you have all the players playing at the same time. What got you to doing that? Like, how did you kind of look at it and say, this 1v1 environment isn't enough, I need to add all these factors, all these different players to this 1v1 environment?
So let's before I answer the 1v1 environmental question, for the people that are listening to this podcast, go to YouTube and type in Holly Barney highlights. HOLLY BARNEY, like the big purple dinosaur, or Barney Fife, or Barney Rubble, or any other figure of ridicule that I've been compared to over the course of my life. Type in Holly Barney highlights and watch what she does when she dribbles. And you just mentioned then that you think it was a fake shot Maradona. I'm guessing that what you're referring to is actually the drag Maradona.
Yeah.
And this isn't the fake shot Maradona, which is a very viable move and is one that she uses once in a while. But what she's really worked hard on, and I will never say perfected, because there's no such thing as absolute perfection, but she's come close to perfecting an initial pre-fake, which is what we call the drag before the Maradona. And you'll see that she's left-footed, so she drags the ball with her right foot from a shielding position into a position right in front of the nose of the defender, so that the defender commits the body weight forward towards the ball. And the very split second the defender shifts the body weight towards the ball, Holly pulls the ball back in the first part of the Maradona and then goes around them in the second part of the Maradona. And there's one clip which is, absolutely beautiful, because one of her teammates does a Cruyff turn, passes to her inside the box. She receives the ball, drags the ball out in front of the defender, pulls it back, and Maradona's that first defender with the drag on the front end of the move. And then the second time she does a regular Maradona around the next defender and then rolls the ball nonchalantly into the corner of the net, because all of this is done in the middle of a penalty area in a crowd. And, I can't wait to see the drag Maradona done at the professional level. And it's amazing because it involves a pre-fake. And pre-fakes are the equivalent of what the magician does before they do a trick. And what magicians do, and I've studied this in depth and read book after book on magic, and what magicians do is they set up a scenario where the whole audience looks in the wrong direction, and they do this entirely on purpose, where they make the audience think that something is happening to the right-hand side of the action on stage, where the actual trick is being performed to the left-hand side. And you can see this in sleight of hand tricks all the time. You don't see what's happening behind the hand or underneath the hand, or behind the back or wherever the trick is being performed, and so, what I've come to realize is that the pre-fake is incredibly important if you can add it to the fake. And don't get me wrong, the fakes are brilliant on their own many times, but if you can put a pre-fake on the front end, the fake's almost unstoppable. And here's an example of when I say unstoppable, because there's lots of skeptics out there and they laugh and they say, no, I was a defender when I was playing and nobody would have beat me with a fake, and you just don't realize, if that's your attitude, you just don't realize how powerful a pre-fake is. For example, the drag in the drag Maradona triggers, and I can only think of it in this manner, triggers something that goes back into the distant, birth of man, into prehistoric man, where, everything was about survival. And I don't know if you've seen Revenant, the movie, where Matt Damon survives, unbelievable hardships, out in somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. And it's a horrific movie. But, the point is that back in the days when everybody had to be first concerned with survival above everything else, you develop this fight or flight response, and prehistoric man developed the fight or flight response. Well, when you do a pre-fake, it triggers, I believe, the fight or flight response. And when Holly does her drag in the drag Maradona, which incidentally was invented by my eldest daughter, Brittany, she started doing it one day because I'd worked her on Maradona turns for years and I'd worked her on shielding. And one day, just out of the blue, she put shielding together with a drag and a Maradona. And it worked absolutely brilliantly against the defender. And I stopped her and I said, show me that again. And she said, what do you mean, Dad? And I said, what you just did. I don't know what to call it, but what did you just do? Show me that again. And she showed it me again. And this is why we've not seen it at the professional level. I don't think it's yet been invented outside of the Legends Club in Kansas City by my eldest daughter, because I've never seen it done on the world stage. And yet, with the drag out in front of the defender, that if you look at Holly's highlight films, you will see her doing time and again. With the drag, it forces the defender into making a commitment to the ball, because the ball is literally put in front of their nose. It's like a juicy carrot to a horse. It's put in front of the horse's nose. The horse goes for it. It's something that the horse can't resist. It's something that the defender can't resist. And I think it goes back to prehistoric humans. And, so with that juicy carrot in front of their nose, the defender commits. And then the regular Maradona from that point onwards destroys them, because they push their weight onto the front foot and the Maradona goes around them in the totally opposite direction. And
Well,
if you don't,
what I love about that story is, and I don't know if you've noticed this because I sure have, and with our current focus on the 1v1s, is the players are actually better at the 1v1s at a certain point than I am, and they've become expert, and specific players become expert at a specific move. Usually that's the way that they have like a favorite move. And when you become an expert at something, you don't really think about doing it, and it allows you to be even more creative with that move. So that story about your daughter wouldn't have happened had she not had all this repetition of that move beforehand. So what coaches, again, should get from this is the importance of repeating, making sure things are perfect. And you tell a great story. I think this is in your podcast about a violin player, and how you met with her, and she talked about the importance of going slow at first and repeating going slow to make sure every step is perfect. And for those that want to see how Andy breaks down his moves, which is amazing, there's on his YouTube page, it's called the Maestro Series. And again, I'll have all the links for that stuff for him. But what I loved about that story and what I see with my players is when they get, I don't want to say perfect, but when they get that high level of efficiency in that specific move, they'll start to be more creative. They'll be able to look up more, make better decisions. And what's great about this Maradona move is, and I find this in soccer in general, it's a game of space. And if you can get the players to start in the space that you want to occupy and then move out of that space to come towards you and open that space, that's how you get to that space. So that kind of bait is just, in my opinion, a really good way to open up the space for you as the player. So that's just a great story. Yeah.
And one of the things I like to emphasize here, which you touched on, and rightly so, is eventually the defender in my practices know exactly what Holly's going to do. They knew exactly what Brittany was going to do when she created the drag Maradona, when she invented the move. All of the players on her team had seen her do this stuff so many thousands of times that you would think they would be able to defend against it. And they couldn't. And that's what I mean by the fight or flight response, is there's something in us that when certain things happen, we're going to run like heck to get away from it. If we see a car crash happening and the cars, are after hitting each other, are coming towards us, there is an unbelievable adrenaline rush, and we get the heck out of Dodge. We run as fast as we can in the opposite direction when we see something happening that we want to avoid. And this is something that's innate. This is something that, has been built into humanity over a period of thousands of years. And I believe that's what makes us go for the bait in the drag Maradona. When that juicy ball is dragged out in front of me, I cannot help but commit to trying to win it, because it looks as though I can win it and win it easily at that moment. But what I don't really realize at the time is the magician has just completely punked me by putting it out there just enough to make me certain I can win it. And as I shift my weight forward, as I go for it, as I go to, to grab at that juicy piece of bait, and imagine that, I'm that shark, and this, this wonderful piece of tuna has run across my snout in the ocean. I'm going to snap at it. I'm going to gobble that thing up. Well, it was an illusion. The dribbler knows that attempt to gobble it up is coming, and just at the last moment, it's pulled away, and then it's dragged completely behind the defender, who's moved in the opposite direction. So this isn't just beating a defender. This is destroying a defender. This is embarrassing a defender. This is leaving a defender looking over their shoulder. This is breaking the defender's ankles type of move. So there's no luck in this. It's all pre-planned. Dribbling is, yes, to a certain degree, improvisational. But if you can mix the improvisation in with the certainty of a planned, magician's type fake, a planned deception that works 999 times out of 1,000, then you can create a dribbler that you can dribble in ways that you've never seen before in the history of the game. And don't believe me by listening to this, because most people are going to be skeptical. Go to my daughter's highlights, and you'll see her again and again and again destroy defenders with a Maradona or a drag Maradona, because she's just gotten so used to setting the defender up that it works at least 9 times out of 10 when she does.
Yeah, when I coaching, I've gone through different courses, and one of my favorite coaching courses, and something that I grew up with, and I know you did too, was the Cover method. And one of the biggest misconceptions about the Cover method is that it's just a 1v1 ball mastery system, where in fact it's a lot more. And I think when I think of the Legends Club, I think of the same thing, that there's a lot of misconceptions that all you guys do is 1v1, but that's not true. You do so much more. So what I want to talk about now is that 2v2 atmosphere, the shooting, the heading, all that stuff that, that you don't necessarily talk about so much, but is ingrained in your philosophy and in the way that you train.
So that's a great question. And a little funny story as an aside, going into that topic that's related to that topic. The vast body of the coaching community loves to criticize dribblers, greedy players, as just doing something that whilst it's fun to watch, isn't really effective. And so a little story from my B license, and on the way to my A license and my advanced national diploma, I was in Tampa, Florida, taking my B license, and we were being coached by a gentleman, lovely man called George Visvari. And George was Hungarian, escaped during the Troubles, got shot at while he was in the middle of the night, crossing borders, etc. Found his way to the USA. Had a very successful coaching career. He won a national championship while he was coaching at the State University of New York. And George is teaching this session, and one of the players in the middle of the session is dribbling, and he's dribbling, he's going left, he's going right, he's going back, he's going forth. And George comes unglued, and he jumps out onto the field from the sideline, and he says, stop. He says, everybody in. So everybody crowds around. And George looks at this guy and he said, this in his Hungarian accent. He says, this is like the pissing in the wetsuit. And we're all looking at each other, like, what's he talking about? And so he said, yeah. He said, you are a cold day and you go in the ocean with the wetsuit on. He said, you surf. And he said, after an hour or two, he said, you need to pee. And you're in the ocean, and you don't want to get out of the ocean. You're having fun surfing. He said, so what do? He said, you pee in the wetsuit. And we're all looking at each other saying, what's this got to do with coaching? He said, yeah. He said, what you just did out here is like the peeing in the wetsuit, and we're still not getting it. He said, give you a nice warm feeling, but don't go anywhere. And it was brilliant. I've never forgotten it, and this is how great coaches coach, is they make coachable moments that ingrain into your mind, the lesson. And, in one moment, he made me realize that I can teach dribbling till the cows come home, which is, late at night, and it's no good if we don't go somewhere with it, so this has to be viable at the highest level. There's no point in teaching a move which isn't going to work at the highest level. And I have unbelievable issues with these people that focus on fast footwork with no explosion. and I'm not going to name any names, but you can go on the internet and there's many people out there that have made quite a reputation, have got quite a following, because they're going through 1,000 different ways to move their feet fast in contact with the ball, with some cones involved, and they go left and they go right, and and they basically do everything within 1.5 yards, 2 yards, and they don't move, they don't explode, they don't treat this practice session as though they've got a defender in front of them that they need to destroy, that they need to go past, and I don't get it, because the very basic need that is associated with deceptive moves is the need to, once you've foxed the opponent and once you've gotten them to shift their weight to a certain foot, you've got to exploit what you've done to create separation so that you can penetrate either with the ball on the dribble, or with a shot and hopefully a goal, or with a penetrating pass that breaks a line. And that's one of the things that I have an issue with. And having said that, I want to go back to your question.
Before I do that, Andy, I just need to go to the bathroom. That story really helped out. So I'll be right back. 1 second.
Okay, I'm going to do the same.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. We should start wrapping it up a little bit, because we still have like a bunch of stuff to go. So I knew before talking to you that I was going to need to split it into a couple of episodes. So that's okay. But let's try and focus a little bit more. So I really have just 3 more things that I want to talk about: the 2v2 shooting, the coaching points, and then your coaching points during the game. But yeah, if that's okay.
So let's now talk about my frustration as a coach, having trained players in a certain number of moves when I first started the Legends Club, and moves that I now believe to be the wrong moves, that that we've rejected now, and we teach more effective moves for the same situation in the game. But one of my frustrations was that my players, having been focused so heavily on 1v1 and using moves to beat a player, weren't able to recognize or see options away from the ball under pressure. Were dribbling with their heads down, and we're actually the epitome of what people criticized us for, which in George Visvari said, the pee in the wetsuit mode. And I'm going to have to, sorry about this. I'm going to have to just, okay, my battery was running down. So,
that's okay.
So, but going back to what we were talking about, we were in this, one-on-one head down dribbling mode, and weren't playing the game with vision like we should have been. And ultimately, what changed my ability as a coach to do a better job was, I had my team, my 79-80 team were touring Britain and playing in the Arsenal Cup and the Manchester United Football Festival, both youth tournaments. And we had the chance when we were in Manchester to see the Ghanaian youth national teams. They brought over their under-19 and their under-17 youth national teams. And this is a great story because I was searching for a way to transfer the emphasis on fantastic dribbling and goal scoring into an attacking third combination play philosophy, if you like, a way in which to optimize my player's ability, not just to beat a player in the one-on-one and score, but also to combine with teammates with incredible vision under pressure in a 1v1, a 2 versus 2, a 3 versus 3, a 4 versus 4. And so we watched the Ghanaian youth national teams playing against what turned out to be the Golden Boys. At the time, we didn't know that we were watching future superstars, David Beckham, Ryan Giggs, the Neville brothers, Paul Scholes. These players were on the field of play, playing for Manchester United's FA Youth Cup Championship, under 17 team. And so it was really interesting because the Ghanaians in the game we watched whipped the Golden Boys within an inch of their life. And the Ghanaians were under 17s. The Manchester United team was under 19. They just won the FA Youth Cup at under 19, so they were best in Britain. And as you can see by the names I threw out there, were amongst the best for the whole of their career. Winning the Champions League, for example, with Alex Ferguson for Manchester United. And so these, as it turned out in hindsight, because I was later able to look up, the squad on Wikipedia, played against the Ghanaians, who were at the time World Cup champions in the under 17 level, the Youth World Cup. And I didn't know at the time what I was watching, but Ghana in 1991 were runners up in the Youth World Cup. In 1993, actually, I think they were winners. In 1993, when we saw them, they were runners up. In 1995, they were winners again. In 1997, they were runners up. In 1999, they had a shocker. They were third in the World Cup. And of course, I'm being facetious when I said they had a shocker. So during the decade of the 90s, they were first, second, or third in every single World Cup, winning 2, runners up twice, and third place once. And when you see something like that happen, it's not luck, it's not a lightning strike, it's a system. So after watching them play and whipping Manchester United, not knowing what they were going to do and how incredible their system was, until later when doing the research, when putting all this together, I went up to the Ghanaians after their game against Manchester United and I said, while you're here, will you be training? And they said, yeah, we're training tomorrow morning. I said, can I come along and watch? They said, sure. And so I went along and I was a few minutes late and I got to the practice field. I sat down to watch and it was ugly. At least in my estimation, it was ugly because I watched this horrible morass of bodies. They literally had both squads, probably close to 50 players, all playing 2-on-2 in the same penalty area. And they were going side to side, not goal to restrain an arc. They were going across the penalty area into cone goals. And it was like Grand Central Station in rush hour. It was bedlam. It was crowded. It was like nothing I've seen before. To this point, I'd done one-on-ones, but nowhere near as many bodies in that confined space, even doing one-on-ones. And as I sat there and I tried to put my prejudices aside, I started to see plays that were miraculous, plays of absolute undeniable beauty happening all over the field. And what I mean by that is not just moves. There were tons of moves. There were tons of nutmegs, just wriggling out of tight circumstances, body swerves, not even standard things that we would call moves, but just perceptive ability to adapt on the fly to this incredibly difficult, challenging environment. But what I also saw under pressure that you wouldn't believe was amazing, quick, little wall passes in, the hallway closet. The space was so tight, you couldn't believe that they'd actually managed to pull off a wall pass. I saw overlaps that you just wouldn't believe that were done through a crowd, in tight spaces, where the guy with the ball managed to, find a seam. The width of a ball is all you need, obviously, to score a goal or make a pass. And these players, because they were so used to playing in a crowd, they could find seams that I wouldn't even look for. And overlaps, wall passes, double passes, they were doing things, combination plays that I'd been taught in space, in grids, with the FA coaching system that I grew up with in Britain when I started coaching, and when I did my sports science degree, and when I lectured in phys ed. All this, came back to roost in a bad way, in a good way, because I realized how lacking in terms of pressure my environment had been, the environment that I'd studied these things had been. And dare I say it, in the British coaching system, it had only been touched on, and I'm sitting there watching, this morass of bodies turn into something that is just incredible, and it reminded me of a Lowry painting where, there's so many things going on in the painting, and the painting might be of some, dull, for example, a 19th century, industrial environment, but within that painting, there was so many things going on. It was kind of like a Where's Waldo situation. There's just so many things going on, and you're trying to pick out the guy in the red and white hoops. And I went after the session, like the idiot that I am and I was. I went up to the Ghanaians and I said, I want to know how you set up the practice to develop this ability. What did you do? How did you set up your cones? What a stupid thing to say to Ghanaians in the 90s. They probably didn't have cones in the 90s. And I said, what did you do? How did you structure? It's like the data-driven approach to training that we have today. It's structure. And how do you structure your practices? I said, what did you do in practice? And they said, this is what we do in practice. And I said, no, you're not understanding me. This is just a stupid Englishman saying to the Ghanaians that we're doing something that was so advanced, it was unbelievable, that you're doing the wrong thing. And they're looking at me saying, obviously they were nice, they were polite, they were patient. But, I just knew after walking away that they thought I was an idiot, because I kept saying to them, how do you structure your practice? What drills do you use? How do you set up your grids? Because I was so much in this pedestrian, you've got to, when this corner of the grid is open, you've got to pass to this corner of the grid mode, that I couldn't see that what they were doing is they had been setting up an edge of chaos scenario where, during this incredibly crowded practice, there was so much undeniable chaos that they had to adapt to less space, less time, more speed than anything I'd ever conceived of being possible, when playing or training for the game of soccer. And it was just an eye-opener, because, eventually I looked at them after 5, 6, 7, 8 stupid questions, and I said, I'm being the stupid English coach, aren't I? And they're like, yes. And I said, so, how did this happen? And they said, look, with a national team, we didn't really train these kids. They were trained in their local communities. And I said, well, how were they trained to be so brilliant? And they say they basically weren't trained. They played street soccer. They played in a crowd. They played with one ball or one tin can or, one whatever that they could kick around, and all these kids would fight over this one thing, in a dusty street, and no grass, no concrete, barefooted, and they would, fight to come out with the ball and stick it between the sticks or, the rocks that had been laid down. And like in England growing up, we threw down our jerseys to make goals on the local park, and that's what they did. They played in crowds, and I said, so how did you identify these players? And they said, we just put the word out all over Ghana. We want your most talented players from your village, your small town, from your inner city community, from wherever it was. We put the word out that we wanted the best of the best, and we brought them into national camp, and we did this. And by this, playing in this crowd, all these players with multiple balls playing 2-on-2 in a crowd, so that they could see their ability to combine with a teammate. They could see the ability to go one-on-one. They could see their ability and their vision to make some sense out of this unbelievably complicated equation, that I had never been exposed to, I'd never seen. Let alone experienced in any shape, form, or fashion. And so, I was left with a vision of these incredible players that had destroyed David Beckham, Paul Scholes, the Neville brothers, Robbie Savage, Ryan Giggs, all these tremendous golden boy Manchester United superstars, from the most successful era in the history of the club, an even bigger era than the Bobby Charlton, George Best era of the 1960s. And I had watched the Ghanaians take these players apart. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a phenomenal blueprint for what I brought back to Kansas City and incorporated. And I think I improved on it, where we would have all these players in a crowd, but we'd keep stats at the end of the round, and you'd get a point for performing a wall pass before you scored a goal. You get a point for the goal, and the players were asked to keep their individual points, not their opponent's points, and report the points to me at the end of the round. And so after every round of playing two teams together in a crowd with the goals 25 yards apart, and only letting my players score in the side netting. They couldn't score by hitting the back of the net. The old saying is in the onion bag. No, you don't put it in the onion bag. You put it just to the side of the string on the side of the onion bag, or just to the side of the post, inside the post, so that it hits the side netting before it hits the back net. And so we asked on our indoor fields that the kids hit a specific panel, to the side of the goal, a 4-foot panel, otherwise the goal doesn't count in our indoor environment. So, we're putting pressures on these kids so that they have to make sense of the chaos, but in very specific, measurable ways. And then we're keeping the stats. So the kids go out there and they compete brutally in a crowd. Everybody goes at once, 2-on-2s, and we teach them the wall pass. We teach them the overlap. We teach them the double pass. We go through these things and we show them. But we also teach the wall pass fake, the overlap fake, so that, just as it looks like they're going to pass to their opponent, to their teammate, instead of passing, they may do a Cruyff. They may just reverse the opposite direction, and go in the unexpected direction, because the defender can see the wall pass coming and is committed to the wall pass. And these things eventually, if you do it enough, become intuitive. And, these kids can be put in a crowded penalty area because that's where they train day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out. And they can make sense of the crowded penalty area because the coaching philosophy, combined with the brave creative leadership emphasis, combined with the environment, combined with the culture, all lead our players into that direction, and eventually that goal, that aim, that objective, that ability to be an incredibly special player and an incredibly special, more importantly, person in life that's willing to be brave and creative and take the risk. And earlier in this podcast, I talked about Mark Zuckerberg. Well, what Zuckerberg did with Facebook, he gave me access to virtually all of my ex-players. And I hunted them down, I searched on their names, and I found something like 90% of my ex-players on Facebook. And I asked them to complete an embryonic survey, as to how much the Legends environment, the influence, the coaching philosophy made them brave, creative leaders for life. Because what became obvious from literally creeping through their web pages, their Facebook site, was that they were leaders, that they were owning their own businesses, that they were running, businesses, that they were doing amazingly different and exciting things, and virtually every single one of them was a leader in life. And, I knew a bunch of players that played for other clubs. And so I did a side survey to see what those players were doing. And they were nowhere near as successful as the former KC Legends players that grew up playing the game this way. And so I started to research the science of leadership. I've literally got hundreds of books. I have a library in our indoor soccer center in Kansas City with all the books that I use to do this research in the library. And I've got another library here in my office, which is where I'm talking from now at home, as well as other places in the house. And doing all this research made me realize that it is your environment when you're growing up that determines whether or not you're going to be a leader, when you mature. And these kids, all they've been asked to do within the Legends Club is make the braver, more creative play. Never give a simple pass. Always do the most difficult things. Try a difficult pass. Go one step beyond where you are before you step onto the field for today's game or today's practice. I want my players doing bigger, greater, faster, huge, hairy things every time they get involved with a practice or a game. As a result, I had all these leaders out in society, and I wrote a second book called Legends for Life about how this environment and the game of soccer, which is the best game in the world for training leaders, but that's a whole book in itself, makes, kids that are trained this way unbelievably risk embracing, and willing to get out there and challenge themselves, fail and fail upwards, and become better as a result of their failure and become a better leader, a better human, a better individual in every aspect, because they're not focused on the outcome. They're not focused on the big house or the fast car. They're focused on doing the right things, with brilliance, creativity, and so then this has led me in the direction of the environment, and that's why we're indoors. We never cancel a practice. Well, that can be 5% of 10% of all practices for a year that we get that other clubs don't. It's just basic things. Our record in a box soccer, that we've got all these boxes, over 70 boxes, in Kansas City, and our record for number of shots taken in an hour and a half is 1,474. And in my best shooting practice outdoors, with any type of realism, which the soccer boxes are intense and realistic and fast and off balance and crazy. You have to be a fox in the box. You have to be a great finisher in these boxes.
So what is that what you just mentioned there? Because that's your shooting environment. So what does that look like?
Well, the boxes are 20 by 12 at the upper age levels, 13 and on. They're 20 foot by 12, and it's a mini squash court. It's a mini racquetball court, that's tiny. Where you're dealing with balls coming at you from all heights at speed. They're pinging off of walls. And the person you're playing against, if you're playing 1v1 in a court, they ping a ball and it hits you on a rebound from the front wall, and there's no way to get out of the way. So you have to be like this table tennis player with a soccer ball, where your reactions have to be incredibly quick. And so you get in there and you beat it out with another player, and at the end of the round you come and give your results, and then you get a different opponent for the next round and you beat it out again, and you might go through 14 rounds of this intense 1 versus 1. Or we put one player on their own in a box, and their job is to count the number of accurate shots they hit, where they hit the front wall and the side wall, and you have to be incredibly accurate to hit the front wall and the side wall time and again, when the ball's moving at speed. And you can't slow it down because your scores aren't going to be as good as the next player. You've got to take it to the edge of chaos, to the ragged edge of your comfort zone, in order to win this competition with the other guys in the other courts that you're competing against.
So
You know, and
what are the rules of this squash soccer that you guys have?
well, for example, everything's got to be hit first time. You know, now we can also do it where you take a touch and hit the ball. So, you know, depending on what you want to do as a coach, do you want to work on first touch? Because, you know, you can work it where you have to take a touch, and the touch you take cannot hit one of the 4 surrounding walls. So you got to take a touch, and you've got to hit the ball before it hits the surrounding wall. And remember, if you're in the middle of the court, you're only 6 foot away from the nearest side wall, max. You know, so you know, you've got to take a great touch with your first touch off of a shot hit by the opponent, you know, in order to set the ball up without it hitting the side wall, because you lose the point if you hit the side wall before you take your shot. So you got to think, if you're a little bit towards the left-hand wall, you got to think, I need to take this touch towards the right-hand wall, because that wall is 9 feet away and the left-hand wall is 3 feet away. And, you know, if I take the touch towards the left-hand wall, my chances of hitting that ball before it gets there are slim and none. Take the touch toward the right-hand wall, I'm going to get there comfortably, you know, to be able to place the ball where I want to place it. So you've got to be thinking about the direction in which you're taking your first touch if you're doing a 2-touch game of box soccer, you know. But we also do box fighting in there, which is dribbling one-on-one. We got little goals that are taped at the end of these boxes, you know, and in these boxes, you know, it's incredible. This, by the way, is our national franchise, the soccer box. You know, and people build these facilities with, you know, small but larger fields, as well as a whole bunch of these boxes, and the repetition factor is off of the charts. And let me give you an example. Riley Smith, who holds the club record, young lady that has been recruited by Missouri State in Springfield, Missouri, to play Division I. Great with her left, great with her right, and you have to hit a lot of balls with your weak foot, even though I'm not a proponent of focusing on your weak foot. You know, you have to hit a lot of balls with your weak foot in these soccer boxes. So you will get to be better with your weak foot than most people get to be with their strong foot, just because the boxes force that to happen. And Riley Smith, in an hour and a half practice, 10 4-minute rounds of on her own in the box, shooting the ball, she hit 1,474 shots. My best outdoor practice with any type of similar intensity and viability, about 50. Now, if you're a believer in the 10,000 hour rule, originally proposed by Erickson, later popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, you know, you look at that and you realize that the 50 shots is, when you look at 1,500 shots and you divide 50 into 1,500, that's 30 times more shots that you get in an hour and a half in a soccer box in one of our facilities, either in Kansas City or around the country, than you will get in an outdoor practice, no matter how you set up your outdoor shooting practice. Because your outdoor shooting practice involves minimal defense, because you just can't put a defender in there and get anything like 50 shots. You know, shots that go, errant shots that go in 50 yards past the goal, those that go in the back of the net have to be dug out. There's a ton of wasted time. You know, you have to have some type of a line drill, because, you know, you're usually shooting in one goal, you know, to make it realistic. And it's just so inefficient unless you put them in a soccer box or on a boarded field. But even the boarded fields, whilst they are 10 times better than an outdoor environment, the boarded fields, you know, don't even come close to, you know, the level of learning that you will get in a soccer box. And so,
yeah, I love that. And, you know, what's great, first of all, with you coming on the show is I think for listeners, it's a little taste of what you can get from Andy on his podcast, which we talked about, which is coaching outside the box, inside the box, right? Coaching inside the box. Is that right?
Yeah. It's a play on words, you know, obviously, because, you know, it makes people think. But, you know, when you think outside the box, which is what we do, you know, you're going to find solutions that other people maybe haven't recognized. You know, so, You know, the old saying is, hey, think outside the box. You know, and so this is a play on think outside the box, but we coach inside the box because in our indoor facilities, we've got all of these little boxes where you hit an unbelievable amount of shots. And on our big fields, you know, which for the 13 through 18 age group or 19 age group, you know, going into college, our big fields are only 72 feet by 36 feet. So they're not big. They're just big compared to our small fields, which are 36 by 18, or our middle-sized fields, which are 54 by about 28. So what we've got here is we've got age-related restraining out to goal line and the central part of the penalty area. And the way I love to say this is that we don't just put the kids in the kitchen with the heat turned up. We don't just put them over the stove with the heat turned up. We make them dance on the hot plate with the temperature at max, you know, and that's the goal of what we do. We want the edge of chaos to be intense, because it's only on the edge of chaos where, you know, your skill is on the verge of breaking down at any moment in time. If you don't do it at speed under pressure, it's only on that edge of chaos, once you've developed the technical ability to do these skills, that you are going to learn to put these skills under pressure into the game situation in the opposing penalty area where the pressure is massive. Lots of bodies, lots of crowds. You look at Barcelona, when they play, you know, most teams they play against in La Liga, the teams park the bus in order to stop Leo Messi, you know, and so you're dealing with having to penetrate through an incredible crowd of defenders. Those teams aren't coming out and playing, you know, goal-to-goal soccer. They realize if they play goal-to-goal soccer against Barcelona, they get killed, because Leo Messi on his own can carve the defense open given a little bit of time and space. So they have to park the bus, you know, and break away to score goals if they're going to get a result. Well, we're training the players that are like Leo Messi, that the other teams are so scared of that they park the bus against us. But we're training all our players to be that player, not just one or two forwards. You know, we're training our forwards, our midfielders, our defenders, and funnily enough, even our goalkeepers are incredible with the ball at their feet. You know, and I've had my goalkeepers, you know, they'll say, "Coach, can I come out and play the second half on the field?" Say, "Sure." Put somebody else in goal. And I have my goalkeepers out on the field, and they can do Maradona turns. I had one kid, Zach Brennan. He's like 6'5" tall, you know, and his nickname was the Albatross, because he had the biggest wingspan, and albatrosses have a huge wingspan. And so we put Zach up at center striker when he came out of goal, and he did a Maradona turn that literally, you know, was a million miles wide, because he had these huge legs. So when he pulled the ball back came back 2 yards, not just 2 feet. You know, and when he pulled it away, it was from a position that the defender had no chance to get a toe in and dispossess him from. So he was incredible at doing the Maradona in front of goal, and he scored lots of goals. He would have been a great first choice centre striker in college. He ended up playing D1 for Drake University in goal, but his ability with his feet was just unbelievable, because, he got our training, and he also got the unbelievable benefits of being the goalie on the wrong side of the ball, facing the bullets, which is incredible for goalkeepers, because they're dealing with the three big shots to a massive degree every practice in the one-on-ones and the two-on-twos, which are reaction saves, diving saves, and one-on-ones. And our goalkeepers, just like shooting in a soccer box, they get 10, 20, 30 times, live action in those situations than any goalkeeper on any other team that's working on possession and rondos and all the things that the establishment is putting out there as being the best things to do, and it's a joke. They're not the best things to do. I love what's happening with, the men's national team at this moment in time in terms of their ability to win big international tournaments, and they're ranking in the top 10 right now. But, no names mentioned, somebody incredibly high in the hierarchy told me to my face that what I should be doing with youth players is playing 5-on-2 possession. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. It's a bad joke because Leo Messi didn't play 5-on-2 possession. Cristiano Ronaldo didn't play 5-on-2 possession. Diego Maradona didn't do that. All the great ones in history didn't play 5-on-2 possession growing up. They played street soccer, rebound with tennis balls, under pressure, with limited time and space. Literally, playing in a whole closet, with against opponents, in relative terms, to what we do today in our ridiculously comfortable, lots of time and space environments on these wonderful fields in the suburbs of North America. And it's frightening what's happening to our kids, because they're not being trained to play under pressure in a crowd. They're not being trained to play like the greatest players in world history. And we've got to change. We've got to stop this. We've got to make things tighter, faster, more challenging. We got to take the mentality of artists, where under pressure anything goes. We can't have systems. One of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard is, I need shape to my offense. And this was literally a national team coach back in the day. You've got to have good shape on offense. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, you've got to have your offense spread out. You've got to have you've got to have this player here because this is his strength. You've got to have this player here because this is his strength. And I'm looking at this coach, and I was young and I wasn't as experienced as this coach. And I'm saying, but don't you want to do the predictable, the unpredictable? Don't you need players that, that can, show the defense a whole new look they haven't seen before? Because if I know where the opposition is going to play, I can put my defenders in the positions to stop the opposition if I know how they're going to play. And, I had to laugh because, back in the day, when Roberto Carlos was playing left fullback for the Brazilian team in 2002 when they won the World Cup. At one point in time, he was in the game, and it was either a Copa America game or a World Cup game, and the commentator said, Roberto Carlos is playing right wing. And I'm like, well, double check this. Right wing, he's a left fullback. And he was playing right wing. So how did Brazil, with arguably the greatest team of all time, that and the 1970 team, how did Brazil, view you've got to have shape to offense if they were letting Roberto Carlos play right wing when he was actually playing left fullback? And that's why they were unstoppable, is their players moved all over the field, didn't play one position. In 1970, Brazil had literally 6 number 10s as their front 6. The front 6 for Brazil were all number 10s in their club, in the Brazilian first division, they could do amazing things with the ball. And the other team could not mark any one player and take away their ability to penetrate. How a team's going to play against Paris Saint-Germain this year if Leo Messi goes to Paris Saint-Germain? Do you mark Leo? Do you mark Neymar? Do you mark Kylian Mbappe?
Yeah.
Do you mark Di Maria?
Yeah.
You got the 2 best players for Argentina in the Copa America, Leo Messi and Di Maria. You got the best Brazilian in the last decade, Neymar. And then you got
the Frenchman too.
Well,
Mbappe.
the least in terms of individual skill, but the guy that undoubtedly was the difference maker, in the last World Cup, and who do you mark? It's, and then, if you were fortunate enough to have Sergio Ramos, on your team, you could have him mark Leo Messi. But oh wait, he's playing for PSG. It's ridiculous. The wealth of riches that they have, is just unbelievable. And the fact is, they got a bunch of these incredible superstars on free transfers. So all they had to cover was their wages.
And I love that that's the goal. And I think that for coaches, a lot of the time, they don't see that PSG as an attainable goal for their players. But I think, creating this type of environment is something that we can all do with our teams. And having gone through it personally, I talked and I said this to you before the podcast, is I always have now 3 voices in my head. whenever I'm coaching. There's my voice, there's Tom's voice, who's been such an influence on me going through the podcast. And then there's your amazing voice that I grew up playing. And your voices are all very different. You have, different accents. So it's really easy to tell them apart. So every single time I talk to you, it's just such a pleasure in catching up. And I always learn so much. And I know we can obviously talk for hours and hours whenever I have you on, but I'll definitely have to have you on again. But I really appreciate your time, Andy. And I really hope you enjoyed being back on the show.
It was a lot of fun. And being as you mentioned, Tom, don't forget I trained him for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I was in his ear. We had endless discussions through the years. And so Tom's a great believer in a lot of the things that we do. And as a result, Tom won the President's Cup, the national championship, with the team he coaches this year. So if people want to win, this works. But at the same time, it develops winners, brave, creative leaders for life, which is more important. So you want to win at the game of soccer, you have to be patient, you have to stay the course, but it works in the long run. And anyway, I'd like to thank you for having me on the podcast. And I'd love to be on if you ever decide to do it again. Then I'd love to be on with you and get deeper into this stuff as time goes by.
Yeah. Just before you go, if you can drop all your media and the podcast which we talked about, and kind of anything else that if coaches want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Well, it's easy to find because I'm kind of technologically challenged at my age, and all I have to do is type in coaching inside the box to find our podcasts. And if anybody wants information, I can send them PDF copies of my books, and I don't sell them to make money. And I think it might have been a glitch in the system because I can't believe this, but recently Amazon was selling my book for $200. My first book, Training Soccer Legends, and you get a free PDF copy from me for nothing of that book. Just email me, Andy at kclegendsoccer.com, and I'll send you free PDF copies of my first two books. I'm writing two more books. One about the massive impact of the environment, which is going to be called Legends by Design. Still trying to decide on the book I'm going to write about the importance of culture, because culture is massive. You got to have parents that get you to the game, that are passionate at least about you, that get you to practices, that work with you at home, or an environment close to home, that you can do this stuff in if you're going to be a great player. So these are all things that don't hold your breath, because it took me over 20 years to write my first book. But I will get you all the resources that I can. I'm not in this game to make money. It's not the purpose. I think I'm fairly set for life. I don't need the money. Doing what we do is unbelievable fun, because these kids get unbelievable benefit out of not being trained in the traditional data-driven way or methodology. They get to be leaders for life, and this stuff is all justified in my books. It's not rocket science. What I have done is just take the environments that develop the greatest players of all time, not just in soccer, but you're in Canada, you're a Canuck, and Wayne Gretzky grew up playing this way. If you watch, the movie about brilliance in multiple sports, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but Gretzky is highly featured, and he grew up playing hockey the way that we train our soccer players. Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson grew up playing basketball the way that we train our soccer players, which is what made them the players that they were or are. And and we're just doing that with soccer, and we're emulating the way that all these greats grew up in their youth life, before they were ever coached by anybody. We're emulating that methodology, and unfortunately the world is going further away from it as we get more structured, and we get more data driven. We want to win the game safely, but you don't develop fantastic individuals who can dominate a game by playing safely. You only develop those players by going high risk and playing on the edge of chaos.
Yeah, I
You know,
couldn't agree more. Thanks again so much, Andy, and we'll talk soon.
it's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure coaching you as a kid, and it's been a pleasure watching your career blossom as an adult. I love it that you love the game, and hope that I played a small part in it. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.